Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of Bird's Eye View, where we connect the past to the present in order to understand what makes the Black community unique. I am your host, Trenda Byrd of Byrdowl Consulting, and today we are talking about Blacks in entertainment. We're going to be looking at the impact and the significance of Blacks in television, movies, and even radio. So, most people watch movies. I know I like to watch movies. One movie that comes to mind is that of Black Panther. I remember when the movie Black Panther came out, and Black people came out what seems like in droves. People came out and supported this movie like crazy. People were dressing up, taking pictures by the cutouts outside the lobby of the movie theater, and doing all kinds of stuff to celebrate this movie. They even had to add more shows just to keep up with the demand. Now the question is why? Why was there such a celebration of this movie, and why did it mean so much to Black people even though it was fictional? I mean, I for one wish that Wakanda was real, but unfortunately it is not real. The answer is because it was very rare to see a Hollywood box office movie that had a Black superhero as the main character, that featured African culture, African symbolism, and where the movie, it was 99.9% of Black people. This movie made it possible for little Black girls and boys to see themselves as heroes, to be portrayed as something more than just the average enslaved person. Although enslaved people, they were heroes in their own right. What Black Panther did was revive Black Americans to reach back and be proud of their culture and their heritage, and to really learn more about Africa in itself. So again, why was this movie such a big deal in the Black community? Because in the beginning, Blacks were not portrayed or seen as heroes, not seen as strong and resilient people. We were actually mocked, discriminated against, and often left out of the storyline altogether. We had to fight tooth and nail just to get where we are today in television and in the movie industry. So we're going to take a look back at just how far we have come. If you're listening, you probably have heard the term blackface. If not, blackface is when white actors would cover their faces with black paint or makeup to portray blacks in minstrel shows. Because of how Black people were portrayed, people began to think that that is how Blacks acted in real life. Audiences expected any person with dark skin, no matter what their background or their education was, to actually be in the stereotypes that they were acting in. Blackface evolved from Broadway to silent movies to race movies to racist cartoons to radio and then to even television. In Broadway, the most popular stage performer in the early 1900s was a comedian named Burt Williams, who performed as a coon in the stereotype blackface called Jonah Man. Now, coon was described as someone who was portrayed as lazy, easily frightened, chronically idle, inarticulate, and a buffoon. Now, Williams teamed up with another gentleman by the name of George Walker. Now, I'm going to include their picture in my Instagram post because these men were both Black. Now, in order to get acting roles during this time, Blacks had to participate in blackface, but they could separate the two, unlike their white counterparts. Williams and Walker billed themselves as the two real coons, and they soon became one of the most successful comedy duos while their act went from vaudeville to Broadway and evolved into a full-scale musical comedy. They produced, wrote, and starred in a show called In the Hominy, which became the first Black musical comedy to open on Broadway. Now we have silent movies. One of the most popular, most famous silent movie was that of Birth of a Nation, which premiered in 1915. Now this movie changed the perception of Blacks from the Jim Crow stereotypes to that of the savage Negro. D.W. Griffith's film. This film was about the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, that they rescues the South and Southern white women in particular from savage Blacks who gained power over whites with the help of the Northern carpetbaggers. Griffith later admitted that his film was designed to create a feeling of disgust in white people, especially white men against colored men. So, this is probably often why people think that Black men are savage and are need to be intimidated by, and you're supposed to be afraid of Black men and that they're dangerous. But that is not the case. Now, you have the race movies. These films were produced entirely in the United States between 1915 and the early 1950s. And these movies consisted an all-black cast and was actually produced for an all-black audience. So this type of film was actually in response to Birth of a Nation. And so these were actually Northern blacks who responded to Birth of a Nation in producing their own movies. The most successful black film producer of the first half of the 20th century was a former railway reporter and novelist named Oscar Michelet. His Chicago-based Michelet Film Corporation operated from 1918 to 1940, and during this time he produced over 44 films. His most important film was called Within Our Gates, an uncompromising look at racial attitudes and prejudice among blacks and whites, and it included both a rape and a lynching. So it was kind of opening people's eyes to what was going on. The growth of truly independent black film production was cut short by the Great Depression and the added costs associated with the change in technology from silent to sound. Few of the small independent black film companies survived the changes, and even fewer remained independent once Hollywood stepped in and took control of black filmmaking by providing the financing. Race movies then changed from organic black entertainment to knockoffs of a standard Hollywood fare, like westerns, crime dramas, and musicals, but featuring all black cast. So now you're getting into where you still had your black cast, but they weren't being produced or they weren't being owned by black people. Racist cartoons were between 1930 and 1950. Animators at Warner Brothers, Walt Disney, MGM, Merry Melodies, Looney Tunes, RKO, and many other independent studios produced thousands of cartoons that perpetuated the same old racist stereotypes. During this period was known as the Golden Age of animation, and between the mid-1960s, cartoons were screened before all featured films. Later on, these same cartoons were cycled endlessly for decades on broadcast TV or cable syndication. Now, when they say decades, when I mean decades, this is going all the way through the 90s, because I remember watching Bugs Bunny, watching Looney Tunes, and I remember specifically a episode where Bugs Bunny, he was actually wearing blackface, and this was just in the 90s. So eventually, the worst of the racist cartoons were removed from television or heavily edited, but many are available on the internet if you just know where to look. To modern audiences, many of these cartoons are quite shocking and graphically illustrate how pervasive and institutionalized racism was in our culture just a short time ago. And I would even argue that we still have institutionalized racism. Now, many people listen to the radio, and radio was very popular. Just like podcasts are popular today, radio was the way of listening to different shows. One of the most popular radio shows of all time was the Amos and Andy Show. The characters were created by Freeman Godson and Charles Correll, two white actors with blackface, and vaudeville, which is actually a type of entertainment popular chiefly in the U.S. in the 20th century, featuring a mixture of specialty acts such as burlesque and comedy and song and dance. NBC began broadcasting Amos and Andy on radio on August 19, 1929, and it was an instant success. It was first a program to be distributed by syndication in the United States. The show ran nightly from 1928 until 1943 as a weekly situation comedy from 1943 until 1955. Portraying blackface, racist stereotypes on the radio was a bit of a challenge because there were no visuals. So that means stereotypical voice characterizations needed to be even more exaggerated to help listeners distinguish between the characters. Although Amos and Andy were cited most often as example of a blackface radio, when Amos and Andy became a TV show, the majority of the actors had to be black, because of course, if they were supposed to be black, then you needed black actors. And I'll find out who those actors were, and I'll include it in the show notes or in my Instagram post. There were other radio shows that had the stereotypical blackface characters, such as Two Black Crows, Beulah, and Aunt Jemima. Yes, Aunt Jemima is a stereotype. So when you go to the store and you see the syrup bottle with Aunt Jemima on it, you are buying into a stereotype. So I personally do not buy that syrup because I am not about that life. Beulah was a supporting character on the popular show Fibber, McGee, and Molly radio series and became a spin-off show. That show was broadcast on radio from 1945 to 1954 and originally portrayed by the actor Marlon Hurt. And I think this is interesting because when I'm telling you these years, 1954 was not that long ago. Like, my dad was born in 1958. So this is not that long ago, you guys. Like, this is in some cases our parents, parents' generation. Like, this is happening when our parents were born. So it's really not that far away. So right now we are going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors. And when we come back, I want to play a clip from Essence TV from 1988 that discusses the black TV image and how it affects not only the world of TV, but the black community and how we look at ourselves. Hi guys, so if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. For one, it's free. There's creation tools that will allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or from your phone. Anchor will also distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast as well, so you don't have to have a lot of listeners in order to make money. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So be sure to download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Now back to our show.
Welcome back to Essence and our 100th show. We thought this convention of television programmers would be an appropriate place for Essence entertainment correspondent Christopher Vaughn of The Hollywood Reporter to take a historical look at black images on television.
Because you and I watch television, we have witnessed events we will never attend, visited places we will never set foot.
I have a dream.
Formed opinions about people we will never meet. Such is the power of television, a single setting where the good, the bad, the accurate, and the distorted are given equal legitimacy. In the intimacy of your home, television touches you, and you are changed.
Because television is so immensely powerful, it's clear that the images presented on television have an immeasurable effect. This is an examination of the images that television projects about us as African Americans. Why those images are selected, how they are selected, and most importantly, by whom.
To begin, television is a business of delivering the largest possible number of viewers to advertisers. This affects the way that most images are selected in two ways. First, television programming must not conflict with the advertiser's image and attitude. Second, it must appeal to the majority of potential viewers. So we see that in large part, viewer expectation can determine which images will be selected. For it is in meeting those expectations that television draws viewers. The earliest image that television presented of African Americans was no different than the image presented of whites. During television's experimental years, the 1930s and into the 1940s and 50s, advertisers sponsored entire programs which were aired locally, bringing entertainment to the tube and creating what has been called vaudeville in a box. Pianist Hazel Scott's 1950 program and the original Showtime at the Apollo in 1954 were just two of the black talent showcases of that early television era. In 1959, Harry Belafonte's variety show made him the first black person ever to win television's Emmy Award.
And nighttime too.
Plagued by troubles in attracting and holding sponsors because of boycott threats from Southern whites, many shows, including Nat King Cole's National Network First in 1956, were dropped. Television is a showcase for black entertainers, but that exposure has fluctuated over time. The late 60s and early 70s were a high point. More than a dozen entertainment programs were hosted by black celebrities, including Sammy Davis Jr. in 1966 and Flip Wilson in 1970. Black entertainers are integral to television. Some would argue that our image as entertainers is non-threatening, therefore acceptable. Others feel that the presentation of our best talent on television has been a powerful force in the push for social inclusion of all black Americans. Another early black television image is surely burned into the memory of all Saturday morning TV viewers, the ever-present native. The damage done to generations of viewers by the distortions that were passed off as African cultures cannot be measured. Never seen as masters of their environment or captains of their fate, an entire worldview has been shaped as consumers of this television fare were directed to dismiss the integrity of a people and their culture, cultures which stand as the earliest known civilizations on the earth.
The Beulah Show.
Who spends most of her time in the kitchen, but never seems to know what's cooking.
When may I expect dinner, Beulah?
Presently, Mr. Harry.
That early stereotype was soon joined by an equally distorted genre, the mammy, the maid, the handyman, all gathered for the singular purpose of serving the white households to which they were attached. Familiar from motion pictures and years of stereotyped imagery, audiences were delivered such programs as the 1950 show, Beulah. Defenders of this series point out that it offered a look at a black woman who spoke English correctly and performed her duties with dignity. This same defense has been given for the eternally controversial series, Amos and Andy, which premiered on television in 1951. Although the main characters have stood for all time as classic coons, supporting characters presented a flip side to their comedic presence. These straight men were some of the first black judges and businessmen that viewers would encounter. In addition, Amos and Andy provided the very first look at a black household in the history of television.
Mama, do you have to get a job?
Oh, darling, if we want to stay in this nice apartment, I do, yes.
It took television over a decade to once again focus on the black household. The most notable was the 1968 series Julia, starring Diane Carroll. This program, like so many that would follow, was criticized for presenting an unrealistic or fantasy image of black people. To present only these kinds of black people as acceptable, and to insinuate that all black people had such lifestyles was offensive to many who were engaged in the struggle for economic justice and cultural integrity. However, supporters of the program remind us that in this escapist medium, no other television programming is held to the reality test. All agree that the limited number of black images on television places an unfair burden on those that do exist to be all things to all people.
Now, I wanted to play that clip because I felt like it was a good way to segue into talking about some of the pioneers in television. But what I'll be able to do, because it was only a short clip, the whole clip is like 22 minutes, but I'll include the link to the whole episode on YouTube in the show notes. So talking about pioneers in television, you also have people like Bill Foster, who was a pioneer in black filmmaking, and he did the comedy The Railroad Porter, and became the first black film in 1912. Okay, and then later on you have people like Sam Lucas, who was the first African-American actor to star in a full-length film playing the title role in Uncle Tom's Cabin. That was in 1914. In 1940 you have Hattie McDaniel, was the first black person to win an Oscar after winning the Best Supporting Actress for her role in Gone with the Wind. And guess what role she played? She played the Mammy. Then you have one of my favorites, Sidney Poitier. In 1963, he wins the Academy Award as Best Actor for his performance in Lilies of the Field. Bill Cosby, despite all the controversy, he still laid the groundwork for black Americans when it comes to acting. He became the first black lead actor on a television drama in I Spy. I think the clip actually mentions him and the relevance of why that is so is such a big deal. He also did Fat Albert in The Cosby Kids, which premiered as the first cartoon with an all-black cast. You also have The Cosby Show. Is probably between The Cosby Show and A Different World is probably one of my two favorite black TV shows, because The Cosby Show actually showed and praised for its cross-cultural appeal and avoidance of racial stereotypes. So this show, for the first time, wasn't showing the racial stereotypes. This show was showing that, hey, you have two affluent African-American people who had children who were doing well in school, who basically showing the total opposite of what you think of the black family unit. A lot of times we always say that, you know, a lot of black kids come from a one-parent home, but this was not the case. This was showing that there are families out there there are black families out there that have that nuclear family unit. And even with A Different World, it was great because now you're opening the eyes. I think this was, when I started watching the show, I think this was kind of like, other than my parents going to an HBCU, Historical Black College and University, this was kind of like my introduction into kind of like the life of what life looks like at a historical black college and university. So I think that's why, and it was important for these shows to be happening, because then you could see that, hey, this is something that I can do as well. I can go to college, and I can go to a college where everybody else that looks like me attends. So you have shows like that, and you also have people like Denzel Washington and Halle Berry. Denzel, he became the only Black Academy Award winner to win both a lead and a supporting actor award when he won for Glory in Training Day. And then Halle Berry, of course, she became the first African American woman to win the Academy Award for Best Actress in her role in Monsters Ball. So we are making a lot of headway in having these pioneers paved the way. And yes, the pioneers who paved the way, they had to be in the films that were demeaning and racially stereotyped, but they opened the door for people like Halle Berry and Denzel to win awards where they got to choose the roles that they got to play, where oftentimes that wasn't the case for people who were doing blackface back during Jim Crow. Now, one of the most popular genres of black culture is that of blaxploitation movies. This genre actually emerged in the United States during the early 1970s. So it also coincides with, the Black Power movement, Black Pride, so it makes sense. These films, while they were popular, they also suffered backlash for disproportionate numbers of stereotypical film characters showing bad or questionable motives, including criminals, thugs, etc. The genre's inception coincides with the rethinking of race relations in the 1970s. Even though these movies were made to make blacks look bad, blacks actually saw them differently. For the first time, blacks actually saw themselves as being portrayed as strong and resilient people, because blacks were kicking butt. They were winning the fights, they were showing their strength, and just all around just showing how powerful that they could be. For example, like in 1974, you have the famous movie Foxy Brown, which is probably one of the most popular movies, starring Pam Grier. Other movies include Cleopatra Jones, Black Dynamite, Shaft, Superfly. And a lot of these movies have actually been remade even today, like Shaft. So what were the significance and the impact of the black culture? This genre ranked among the first in which black characters and communities are the heroes and the subjects of the film and television, rather than the sidekicks or the villains or even the victims of brutality. These movies are what put black actors and actresses on the path of getting more prominent roles outside the genre. So when you see people like Pam Grier and Samuel L. Jackson, and you see Richard Roundtree from Shaft, these type of movies put them on the map, which helped with the creation of having our own black-owned networks and production companies. So what does having black-owned networks and production companies actually do? What it does, it actually puts the money back into the black community. So you have networks like BET, the OWN Network by Oprah Winfrey, TV One, Bounce TV, the Impact Network. Those are only a few to name. I didn't want to list all of them on here. So how has the past paved the way for blacks in television and movies today? Now we have black filmmakers who are making their own mark in Hollywood, which is allowing blacks to be able to tell their own stories the right way in making the content that we can enjoy without being belittled. Such movies as When They See Us by Ava DuVernay and Medea with Tyler Perry, and now that Tyler Perry has his own Tyler Perry Studios, I think that's a great accomplishment. Going even back further, you have School Days with Spike Lee, Get Out, you have Jordan Peele, you have Baby Boy, which was done by John Singleton, and he recently just passed not too long ago. And actually, I remember reading an article saying that John Singleton gave some of these black actors and actresses that we know about, like Taraji P. Henson, Tyrese, he gave them their start. So had it not been for a black filmmaker, some black actresses and actors probably wouldn't have gotten the chance that they needed in order to break out into Hollywood, into acting. And you also have people like Kerry Washington, who's starring in primetime roles such as Scandal, and Viola Davis with How to Get Away with Murder, and even Shonda Rhimes, who even created those shows, that became very popular and, big time hits. So you have black movies of today like The Black Klansman, Black Panther, The Hate U Give, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, If Beale Street Could Talk. Some of these movies have actually won Academy Awards recently. So in closing, we have come such a long way from playing roles that were demeaning and disrespectful to acting in prominent roles and creating our own content and owning our own companies. We are in a place now where we are controlling the narrative and can tell our own stories. Well, now it's time for Bird's Eye View Review. Now this segment, actually, I'm going to be featuring different black-owned companies that I feel like we need to support because they're doing great work. And just every episode is going to feature a different black-owned company because I believe in investing back into the community. So this product is Products by Lizzie, which is a natural skincare made fresh and eczema friendly. I particularly love this brand because I use her eczema butter and it works wonders. I actually suffer from a mild case of eczema and the cream really helps a lot. There was a time where a little while ago, my fingertips were actually peeling for some reason. My fingers were really dry, and after using the eczema butter for about maybe a week or so, it really started to clear up. And it smells really great, and she also has deodorant, she has laundry detergent, so just be sure to check it out. The website is actually productsbylizzie.com, and the link will be in the show notes, and I believe she's actually out of North Carolina if I'm not mistaken, but the links will be in the show notes, so be sure to check Products by Lizzie. Now, follow me, just some reminders, follow me on social media. You can find me on Instagram at Byrdowl_consulting. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter. And if you're listening to Apple Podcasts, please be sure to leave a 5-star review and tell your friends about the podcast. Share this with your friends and family. On Anchor, you can actually leave me a voice message. You can also click in the show notes to leave that message. And be sure to, if you want to support the podcast, you can purchase clothing from Fast Forward Progress. It is actually a black-owned business that celebrates black excellence while still making the dopest clothing on the market. So click the link in the show notes and you can purchase a t-shirt or a sweater, and part of the proceeds will go to the podcast. Now, for my educators, if you or your organization or someone you know is looking for an idea for a Black History program or to do a program for you, please feel free to schedule a consultation with me today. Again, the link will be in the show notes, or you can always email me at birdowlconsulting@gmail.com and we can schedule an appointment today. Just want to mention the cover art and all of my Bird Owl logos are designed by Willpower. So you can find him on Instagram and his link will be in the show notes as well. So I hope you guys have a great day. This is it. So thank you so much for listening. And remember, in order to know where you are going, you have to know where you come from. So see you guys next week. Bye. A 5-star review and tell your friends about the podcast. Share this with your friends and family. On Anchor, you can actually leave me a voice message. You can also click in the show notes to leave that message. And be sure to, if you want to support the podcast, you can purchase clothing from Fast Forward Progress. It is actually a Black-owned business that celebrates Black excellence while still making the dopest clothing on the market. So click the link in the show notes and you can purchase a t-shirt or a sweater, and part of the proceeds will go to the podcast. Now, for my educators, if you or your organization or someone you know is looking for an idea for a Black History program or to do a program for you, please feel free to schedule a consultation with me today. Again, the link will be in the show notes, or you can always email me at byrdowlconsulting@gmail.com and we can schedule an appointment today. Just want to mention the cover art and all of my Byrd Owl logos are designed by Willpower. So you can find him on Instagram and his link will be in the show notes as well. So I hope you guys have a great day. This is it. So thank you so much for listening. And remember, in order to know where you are going, you have to know where you come from. So see you guys next week. Bye.